The cops had no reason to stop him. Marcus Carter was just walking home, minding his own business, when flashing red and blue lights cut through the night. "Hey, you! Hands out of your pockets!" Two officers stormed out of the squad car, their boots crunching against the pavement. The street was empty. No witnesses, no one to help. "You match the description," Officer Bradley said with a smirk, stepping closer. Marcus froze. He had heard those words before. It never ended well. "What description?" he asked, his voice steady. Officer Carter, the younger of the two, shifted nervously, but Bradley just laughed. "We ask the questions. You answer." Marcus clenched his jaw. They had no idea who he was, and in just a few minutes, they were going to regret it. Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from. And if you believe in justice, hit that subscribe button. Marcus Carter's fists clenched as he stood still, the cold night air biting at his skin. The last words from Officer Bradley echoed in his head. "We ask the questions. You answer." But what question was there to answer? He had done nothing wrong. His heart pounded, but his face stayed calm. He had been raised to handle situations like this. His mother always told him, "Don't fight them. Stay calm. Just make it home." But standing here, under the harsh glow of the streetlights, it didn't feel like home was anywhere close. This wasn't just a bad night. This was a test, and the cops had no idea who they were dealing with. Marcus Carter was no troublemaker. 17 years old. Honors student. He had a 4.0 GPA and had already been accepted into several top colleges. Debate champion. He knew how to hold his own in an argument, but right now wasn't the time. Aspiring lawyer. His biggest inspiration? His uncle, David Carter, the U.S. Attorney General. Marcus never used his uncle's position for anything. But tonight, that might change. Officer Bradley, 40s, aggressive, power-hungry. He had been on the force for years and had his own way of doing things. He loved the control that came with his badge. He never thought about who he was targeting, only that he had power over them. Officer Carter, late 20s, uneasy but complicit. He wasn't as forceful as Bradley, but he wasn't going to stand up to him either. He had seen Bradley do this dozens of times before, and he always looked the other way. Location, just a few blocks from Marcus's home. The streets were quiet. No cars, no bystanders. The only sound was the faint hum of streetlights and the crackling of the police radio. The air was cold, heavy with tension. Marcus knew this was no coincidence. They had stopped him because they could. Not because of any crime, not because of any real suspicion, just because he was a black teen walking alone. As Marcus stood there, his mind raced. If he argued, things could get worse. If he stayed silent, they'd keep pushing. If he called his uncle, everything would change. Officer Bradley stepped closer, smirking. "What's the matter, kid? You look nervous." Marcus took a slow breath. He wasn't nervous. He was angry. And soon, they would be the ones shaking. Marcus exhaled slowly, keeping his face calm as Officer Bradley stepped closer. "What's the matter, kid? You look nervous." Marcus locked eyes with him. He wasn't nervous. He was calculating. Because everything about this situation was wrong. There was no reason for them to stop him. No reason for Bradley's hand to keep hovering over his gun. No reason for Officer Carter to look so uneasy. And yet, here he was, forced to defend himself for simply existing. But Marcus knew one thing. They had picked the wrong kid. Officer Bradley circled him slowly, tapping his fingers against his belt. "Where you headed, kid?" Marcus didn't move. "Home." "Home?" Bradley repeated, amused. "Kinda late for a nice kid like you to be walking alone." Marcus stayed silent. He had learned a long time ago that anything he said could be twisted against him. Officer Carter shifted, clearing his throat. "Sir, maybe we should—" Bradley held up a hand, cutting him off. "Pat him down." Officer Carter hesitated. "What?" "Pat him down," Bradley repeated, voice sharper. Carter swallowed hard, then stepped forward. Marcus stood perfectly still as Officer Carter's hands patted down his pockets, his jacket, his waistband. He already knew what they'd find. Nothing. But that wasn't the point, was it? This wasn't about finding something. This was about showing power. Officer Carter finished searching and stepped back. "He's clean," he muttered. But Bradley wasn't done. "Check his bag." Marcus's jaw tightened. "You have no reason to search my bag." Bradley chuckled. "Kid, we don't need a reason." Then, before Marcus could react, Bradley snatched the bag off his shoulder and dumped it onto the hood of the police car. His books and papers scattered. His phone slid across the metal. Marcus felt heat rise in his chest. Not fear, fury. This wasn't about a crime. This was about humiliation. A few blocks away, a group of teenagers had noticed the flashing lights. One of them pulled out their phone. "Yo, they got Marcus!" They started recording. Marcus saw them out of the corner of his eye. Good. If things went bad, at least there would be proof. Bradley smirked as he shuffled through Marcus's books. "So, what are you? Some kind of nerd?" Marcus didn't respond. Bradley's eyes landed on a thick folder. He grabbed it, flipping through the papers. Law school applications, internship offers, a recommendation letter from the U.S. Attorney General. Bradley's smirk faltered. "What's this?" he muttered. Marcus finally smiled. "Why don't you read it?" Bradley's eyes narrowed. He turned to the signature at the bottom of the letter. David Carter, the U.S. Attorney General. Bradley stiffened. Marcus could see the realization dawn on him. Bradley had messed up. Badly. But before he could react, Marcus picked up his phone and dialed. As the call rang, Marcus watched Bradley's face go from smug to panicked. Officer Carter took a step back, suddenly pale. Bradley's mouth opened, but no words came out. Marcus brought the phone to his ear. "Hey, Uncle David, I need your help." And just like that, everything changed. Marcus held the phone to his ear, watching Officer Bradley's smirk fade as the ringing continued. Officer Carter took a step back, his face paling as he saw the name on the screen. David Carter, U.S. Attorney General. Bradley's confidence cracked. Who are you calling?" he asked, voice suddenly less amused. Marcus didn't answer. Then, click. The line connected. "Marcus? What's wrong?" came a deep, authoritative voice on the other end. Marcus didn't even have to explain. His uncle immediately sensed something was off. "I'm being harassed by 2 cops, Uncle David. No reason. They stopped me, searched me, dumped my stuff on their car like I'm some criminal." A tense pause. Then his uncle's voice turned ice cold. "Where are you?" Marcus gave the location. David Carter didn't ask another question. He just said 4 words. "Stay where you are." Then the call ended. The moment Marcus put his phone down, he saw it. The shift. Bradley wasn't cocky anymore. His fingers twitched against his belt. His jaw locked. Who did you just call?" he demanded. Marcus tilted his head. "My uncle." Bradley swallowed hard. "Your uncle's a lawyer or something?" Marcus smirked. "Or something." Officer Carter stepped forward quickly. "Bradley, maybe we should—" But before he could finish, a new sound filled the night. Sirens. Multiple. Getting louder. Bradley's eyes widened. A row of blacked-out SUVs turned the corner at high speed, tires screeching. Federal agents, not local police, poured out. Guns drawn, movements sharp. The small crowd that had gathered on the sidewalk gasped. Officer Bradley and Officer Carter froze. "Drop your weapons," one of the agents barked. Bradley immediately raised his hands. Carter did the same. "Marcus?" He crossed his arms. He wasn't afraid anymore. A black car pulled up behind the SUVs. The back door opened, and out stepped David Carter, the U.S. Attorney General. He was tall, imposing, sharp in his Navy suit. His expression was unreadable, but deadly serious. He walked straight up to Marcus. "You okay?" he asked, voice low. Marcus nodded. David turned his head slightly, his cold gaze falling on the two officers. They looked like they wanted to disappear. Bradley stammered. Sir, we were just doing our job. The kid was acting suspicious, so—" David held up a hand. Silence. He turned to the leading agent. "Are the body cams on?" "Yes, sir." "Good. I want every second of this documented." Bradley and Carter shared a nervous glance. David looked back at Marcus. "Tell me exactly what happened." Marcus kept his voice steady. He explained how they stopped him for no reason. He described how they searched him, even after finding nothing. He told them about Bradley dumping his belongings on the car to humiliate him. Bradley tried to cut in. "Sir, this is a misunderstanding." David Carter's expression didn't change. "Agent Reynolds," he said calmly. One of the federal agents stepped forward. "Sir, arrest them both." Bradley's face twisted in shock. "Wait, what?" Two federal agents moved in. "You can't do this," he shouted, trying to pull away. "This is a mistake. We didn't do anything." David Carter didn't flinch. "Oh? You didn't harass my nephew?" Bradley froze. Marcus smiled. Now he gets it. Bradley tried to save himself. I didn't know who he was." David stepped closer, voice like steel. "And if he wasn't my nephew, you would have done worse, wouldn't you?" Bradley opened his mouth, then closed it. He had no excuse. And now, he had no badge either. Officer Carter, who had been silent the entire time, suddenly spoke. "Sir, I didn't want to—" David turned to him. "And yet, you did." Carter's face fell. "I was following orders, bad orders, and you followed them anyway." Carter looked like he was about to cry. Marcus almost felt bad for him. Almost. Then the cuffs clicked. Bradley and Carter were shoved into the back of a federal SUV. Their careers over. The bystanders filmed every second. A corrupt officer exposed, a complicit officer taken down. Justice served, quickly. And Marcus, he felt something he hadn't felt since the moment those cops stopped him. Safe. David Carter turned to his nephew. "Let's go home." Marcus nodded, walking toward the car. But before getting in, he glanced back one last time. Officer Bradley sat in the SUV, staring at him with wide, stunned eyes. Marcus met his gaze. This time, it was Marcus who smirked. Then, without another word, he got in the car. The door shut, and they drove away. The black SUV cruised through the city streets, the distant sound of police sirens fading behind them. Inside, Marcus sat in silence, staring out the window. The night had changed everything. His uncle, David Carter, the U.S. Attorney General, sat beside him, reviewing something on his phone. His expression was unreadable, his mind already working on the next steps. "You okay?" he finally asked, breaking the silence. Marcus nodded, though the truth was he wasn't sure. "Good," his uncle said, "because this isn't over." Marcus turned to him, confused. "What do you mean?" "They're in cuffs. It's done." David Carter sighed, his sharp gaze locking onto Marcus. "No, it's not. And you need to see why." He handed Marcus his phone. On the screen was a report. Marcus's eyes widened as he read the names. Bradley and Carter weren't just bad cops. They were part of something bigger. Bradley had dozens of complaints against him: racial profiling, excessive force, false arrests. Most of them had been dismissed. Officer Carter had signed off on multiple false reports, backing up Bradley's lies. And the worst part? They weren't the only ones. There were more officers like them. More innocent black teens who had been harassed, arrested, even sent to prison, all because of fabricated charges. This wasn't just a bad night. It was a pattern, a system designed to let bad cops get away with it. Marcus felt his stomach twist. This has been happening for years? His uncle nodded. And tonight, you weren't the first. Just the first to have the right last name. The words hit like a punch. Marcus knew it was true. If his uncle hadn't been the most powerful lawyer in the country, would he still be in cuffs right now? Would he still be on the side of the street, pleading his innocence to cops who didn't care? Would he even be alive? The realization sent a chill down his spine. His uncle continued. We've been watching these two for a while, but we didn't have enough to take them down. Until tonight. Marcus's eyebrows furrowed. Wait, you mean my case is now evidence against them? David nodded. And not just them. We're launching a full investigation into the entire precinct. Marcus exhaled slowly. It wasn't just about him anymore. It never had been. His case had shined a light on something much darker. So, what happens next? Marcus asked. David leaned back, crossing his arms. We expose them, every single one of them. Meanwhile, back at the federal building, Officers Bradley and Carter sat in an interrogation room. Bradley was furious. He still believed he could talk his way out of this. Carter was shaking. He knew it was over. A federal agent entered, dropping a thick case file in front of them. "You two are finished," the agent said. Bradley scoffed. "You think you can pin something on us? We were doing our job." The agent raised an eyebrow. "Oh? So racial profiling, false arrests, and evidence tampering are part of your job?" Bradley froze. The agent slid a tablet across the table. It was playing body cam footage. Bradley searching Marcus's bag for no reason. Him dumping Marcus's belongings on the car. His words, "We don't need a reason." He had incriminated himself. And he knew it. For the first time that night, he had nothing to say. Within 24 hours, the scandal exploded. News outlets picked up the story. Civil rights lawyers called for reform. Protesters gathered, demanding justice for all the innocent people wrongfully arrested by cops like Bradley. And Marcus, he watched it all unfold from his uncle's office. His hands clenched into fists. He had won. He had exposed them. But the fight wasn't over. His uncle turned to him. "You started something big tonight, Marcus. What do you want to do next?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "I want to make sure this never happens again." David Carter smiled. "Then let's get to work." Because now, Marcus wasn't just a victim. He was part of the fight. Marcus sat in his uncle's office, watching the news coverage unfold. His name was everywhere. U.S. Attorney General's nephew exposes corrupt cops. Body cam footage reveals racial profiling in local police department. How one teen's courage sparked a federal investigation. It was bigger than he ever imagined. What had started as one unjustified stop had turned into a national conversation. And for the first time, Marcus realized something. This wasn't just his fight anymore. It was bigger than him. At that moment, across town, Officer Bradley and Officer Carter sat in court. Bradley looked furious. His lawyer whispered to him, but he wasn't listening. Carter looked defeated. He knew this was the end. The judge's voice echoed through the courtroom. For excessive force, racial profiling, and falsifying reports, Officer Bradley and Officer Carter are officially stripped of their badges. Their careers Over. Their power gone. Their names ruined. As they were escorted out, reporters swarmed the courtroom. "Officer Bradley, do you have anything to say?" Bradley snarled. "This is all political." Carter, on the other hand, whispered something under his breath. I should have stopped him. But it was too late for regrets. The world had already moved on without them. Back at the federal office, David Carter leaned back in his chair, watching Marcus. "You did something important tonight," he said. "But this isn't over." Marcus looked up. "What do you mean?" His uncle gestured towards a stack of files on his desk. Other cases of racial profiling, more victims who didn't have an attorney general in their family, more stories that never made the news. "There are hundreds of kids like you, Marcus," his uncle said, "except they didn't have cameras, they didn't have proof. And most of them," he sighed, "they didn't get justice." Marcus stared at the files, his heart heavy. His case had been a lucky break. But what about the others? Would they just be forgotten? Not if he could help it. That night, Marcus made a decision. He wasn't going to let this be just another headline. He wasn't going to move on like nothing happened. He was going to fight for change. And the first step? He opened his laptop and started writing. He told his full story. He called for new laws against racial profiling. He demanded accountability for bad cops. Within an hour, his post went viral. Celebrities shared it. Activists praised his courage. Lawmakers took notice. And before Marcus knew it, he wasn't just a high school kid anymore. He was a voice for justice. Later that night, Marcus's mom knocked on his door. She had been quiet all evening, watching everything unfold. Now, she sat on his bed and took his hand. "I almost lost you that night, Marcus," she whispered. Marcus swallowed hard. "I know, Mom." She smiled softly. "But instead you changed everything." Tears welled in her eyes as she cupped his face. "I am so proud of you." And for the first time since it all happened, Marcus let himself feel it. The fear, the relief, and the overwhelming realization that he had survived. The next day, Marcus received a call. It was from a civil rights organization. They wanted him to speak at an upcoming rally. At first, he hesitated. He wasn't a politician. He wasn't a lawyer yet. He was just a kid who got lucky. But then he thought about all the names in those case files. The kids who never got justice, the ones who never made it home. And he realized something. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for them. So he took a deep breath and said yes, because this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Marcus stood in front of a sea of people. The rally was bigger than he expected. Hundreds of people, young and old, all gathered for one reason: justice. He stepped up to the microphone, gripping the edges of the podium. This was it. "A few nights ago, I was just another kid walking home," he began, his voice steady but strong. "But to those officers, I was a threat. To them, my existence was enough of a reason to stop me, search me, humiliate me." The crowd was silent, listening. But I got lucky. I had someone to call, someone with power. And because of that, I got justice. He paused, looking out at the faces before him. But what about the people who don't? What about the ones who never make it home? A murmur spread through the crowd. Some people nodded. Some had tears in their eyes. That's why we're here today. Not just for me, but for every name we never got to hear. The crowd erupted in cheers. Marcus took a deep breath. This wasn't just his story anymore. It was a movement. Do you think officers who abuse their power should face harsher punishments? How do we make sure this never happens again? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe in justice, truth, and change, like, share, and subscribe. Because stories like these, they need to be told. See you in the next one.